Hi there, time for the next video, and I tried to keep it more intense this time because I think it's oftentimes I think a lot and I think a lot and I think a lot and I hesitate and I think and I hesitate and I think and I don't say something and I just am stuck in my train of thought and not really progressing in a way that would be intriguing and interesting to listen to. So what I want to do in this video, I want to read an article that I wrote on Medium. I have not published it, it's the first one that I wrote, but I have written them simultaneously in different articles. And when I'm doing that, I think, I will try to keep it more intense. I will unfortunately stumble on words and so forth, but that's a part of the process of becoming a better speaker. And I also think maybe I'll do more of them, not just one. This is the one that I have read the most, so I think the language was fluent much more, even though I've not pronounced it before. I've read it so many times, so it's kind of, the phrases are in some way in my head. They're familiar. And I also think that I will probably do these articles more times, because I thought, well, maybe I should practice before I record, but then I thought that, well, if I'm actually recording, it feels more intense and it feels more fun, and I will actually so I then can record them another time. It doesn't matter if I do it a couple of times. I like same video with same text. It's a different video with the same text, doesn't really matter. So I'll just start reading and we'll see how it goes. Now, it's a bit challenging, but it's also fun. Okay. And this is a text that is more, it's kind of deep in the sense that, okay, not philosophical deep, but it's large questions and topics that I have on my mind that are similar in some respects to what I have been talking about, but it will probably be perceived as more intriguing this time, because I don't think, I have been thinking a lot when I wrote this, but when I speak about it, it's like, it's totally different. So let me just begin. Okay, what is your part in the New World era? An ambitious headline for the first publication, but my intention in writing here is not to babble about topics that I find non-important. There is a time and place for people who address other light-hearted topics. We need these people, but we can't only be light-hearted when you and I and everyone around us are part of a world in dramatic change on many scales. It would be a terrible mistake not to try to make sense of it. Some people need to tackle that task. I'll do my best. Setting the ambition. I do not promise that I will reveal an understanding of the whole scope of changes that take place in our world today, but I firmly believe that I have a substantial contribution to make. As many others, I try to grasp the essence of our civilization and state and get an accurate picture of what is happening. And if you're already bored of this ambitious, high-level perspective I try to take, I kindly suggest you to consider the option of not bothering to listen on or read on, is what I've written here. Because I believe that our part in this world of rapid change is determined by our unwillingness in written form to understand difficult topics. Understanding and positive impact are not easily obtainable and requires a rigorous, continuous effort to achieve. That said, those who persevere, who keep on learning, acting, listening, talking, and in this case reading, actually listening, are those who ultimately will be qualified to make the world a better place. I urge you to ask yourself one thing before we start. Why do you bother to read on? Just make a 2-second mental note. That may anchor a decisiveness for future action and not make this another wasted pace of time on the internet. We all make that mistake, wasting time of our invaluable life. Less or more. In the same way that it's your responsibility to find valuable information and put it to good use, it's my responsibility as a writer, or speaker in this case, to give leverage to the information I put out. So make that short mental note. One caveat before diving in. I'm aware that the ambition to describe the current state of civilization and everything it means to is a recipe for failure. I mean, no one person can get even close to 100% comprehension due to the complexity. Such is the nature of all greater understanding. Therefore, I'm open to other insightful opinions and will reevaluate my thought if necessary. We all have a piece of the puzzle. Hard truths. It's a hard thing to say, though, that your unwillingness to understand determines your contribution. It can be misinterpreted as elitism. If some are more qualified to make good contribution, then I'm suggesting that we all won't have an equal part to play in this big game of an ever-increasing acceleration of human civilization. In the best of possible world, we would have. But the principles that guides me, which I'm about to share with you, sometimes direct me to uncomfortable truths. And on our mission to grasp these truths in order to advance as positive change maker, which I hope you have in mind, you wouldn't have read this far otherwise. Regardless of your scale and ambition, we have to understand what they are. Inconveniently enough, uncomfortable truths are the most important that we learn to acknowledge as truths. Because these are the ones that will always haunt us due to our admirable, fully understandable, and sometimes altruistic unwillingness to face the horrors, or i.e. hard truths, that are always present in our lives. We insist on looking in another direction, avoiding these truths. And to qualify as a change maker, one cannot do that. And in regard to hard truths, I'll not approach the darker developmental issues in our history and society. Today I start with what I believe to be a sound opening approach to understand a subject such as hard truths. I want to understand it at a higher level before addressing factual, real-world actualities. Let me begin at the other end, distractions. Questions like, how do I get in shape? Or what's the next good business idea? And statements such as, I have a recipe for a better world. I know what will change your life. These are all ways of expressing a way of being, you could say. And I don't think I look down on people who express such things. I'm a victim of these thoughts as well. However, whatever thoughts you have, questions you raise, and dogmas you preach, you're continually expressing who and what you are by showing what you have on your mind and simultaneously sowing that in other people's minds. You and I are always communicating this by direct communication or in our actions. We have to be careful about what we think and do. It determines our ability to contribute and be useful. So, where are we all looking? The example given above are expression of common, somewhat important questions and perspectives. They are, but in my opinion they are not important enough, at least if you see to the average person expressing them. We're not looking close enough in order to discover harder truths. I made the claim that some people, not all unfortunately, will have a bigger part to play in the future. The same rule applies for perspectives and things people have on their minds. Some perspectives, a way of looking at the world, will again, unfortunately, not be as rewarding as other ones in their contribution to a better world. So, synthesizing hard truth with distraction to get better perspectives. If some perspectives are better than others, does that mean that multiplicity and distractions from hard truths are all bad? It is not to say that different perspectives aren't fruitful and essential for human flourishing on all levels. My point is simply that in the distillation of perspectives that takes place as an ongoing process throughout our history of human civilization, only some perspectives survive and will be viewed as truths. But it's our responsibility to make sure that we try to emphasize the ones that do contribute and humbly communicate with the ones that don't. Going back to my headline, what is your part in the New World Era? It's important to understand that we, by the information we consume and the discussion we partake in, determine our qualifications as change makers. Because these inputs and outputs, they morph our perspectives. So then, how does one find and identify the right conversation and the right perspectives? It's outside the scope of this text to describe how to find the equally important right conversations, demanding a revisit another time. The right perspectives, on the other hand, are within the scope. They're at the core of our investigation. They're found by synthesizing hard truth and distractions to get better perspectives. Let me explain. The hard truth that I've been harping about, I refer to as discoveries in science to make things simple. It was a hard truth for the church to handle the fact that Earth was not the center of the universe, for example. But I will be careful not to put science as high on a pedestal as some do. That's a controversial statement and is not to be interpreted as a denunciation of science. On the other hand, on a philosophical level, I think blind praise to science would violate the principle about getting to better perspectives that actually are inherent in science, which I'm about to describe. Science has proven to provide us with so many improvements in the condition of human life that it would be very foolish to discard it. As opposed to this scientific hard truth, the distractions are more subtle and less obvious in its validity. I happen to use distractions as a way of describing less important perspectives. The tricky thing, though, about distractions is that now and then some of them actually contribute significantly. An analogy is the evolutionary process of mutations in genes that can worsen the condition of the organism, but now and then proves to better the organism's ability to live and flourish. Simply put, some distractions happen to improve our perspectives and our civilization, despite the fact that most don't. The case for science. In the present era, with our attendant enlightenment ideals, we often praise science as the key to insight and betterment. I definitely won't go as far as to say that science has played out its role, far from it, or that it is not sophisticated enough for the deepest mysteries of human existence. But the same scrutinizing and thoughtful principles that ended up in the scientific approach should always be present if we want progress. Science, in a narrow definition, may miss the more fundamental actual realities of existence. Philosophy and creativity are still cornerstones of human achievement, as well as science. The emphasis on science, in its narrow definition, should probably not be as dominant as it has been. That's a very bold statement for science-minded individuals to take, and is easily misinterpreted. With a narrow definition, I mean the outlook on science as an independent thought structure that does not adhere to philosophical thinking, philosophy of life, or other dimensions of a yet unexplored thinking. An example can illustrate its limitations. If a farmer in the beginning of civilization would have been aware of his evolutionary origins, it would be a miracle and very promising for many discoveries to be made ahead for sure. But it would not help him in most urgent tasks to put food on the table today. My point is that hard truths of science are invaluable tools that will never decrease in absolute utility. But the immediate task to pragmatically handle the obstacles and challenges of life sometimes lower the relative utility of narrowly used science to the utility of practical management of more urgent tasks. This is obvious when you contemplate the fact that when you go out about your day, you're forced to do many things that do not involve scientific thinking. The relative utility of these activities is higher than the science in accordance with the law of diminishing marginal utility. The opportunity cost is just too high. In simple terms, there's a limited amount of time you can devote to science. Scientific discoveries help identify fertile ground. So what then is the solution? Since I believe that there is a very strong scientific explanatory connection between all these terms, bear with me here: pack animals, communication, cooperation, simulation, big brain, civilization. I think we are, in our current era, are blind to the utilities of a word I think I will use another one for, but the utility of reciprocal intercourse. Yes, science can explain the benefits of this, and I will explain the word. It's the wrong word here, but yeah. Yes, science can explain the benefits of this, but by putting our current time in the perspective of historical development, I think the revelation of science in the 18th century proves to be recently enough to make us blind for its uses, and too distant to be at the sole pinnacle of useful thought patterns. If the narrow definition is used, again, the absolute utility won't decrease, rather the opposite, but the relative utility of science to reciprocal intercourse will diminish. because the absolute utility of awareness about the latter will skyrocket. This is part of the solution. To clarify, reciprocal intercourse is obviously just a fancy word for social interaction, mainly between humans, but also between us and other animals. At this stage of my argumentation, the claim of the importance of reciprocal intercourse in comparison to science is very groundless, but the analogy of the prehistorical farmer goes further. The investment that the enlightened farmer will do in his and his species' future flourishing by setting off time to understand and develop new practical uses for his understanding of his evolutionary region should not be underestimated. His time investment in investigation is roughly equivalent to the value of today's scientific research. We're blessed to have time to do these things, but we can't forget that the prerequisite for that is time. More effective production makes this possible. If the farmer is on the threshold for making past this year or day, a time investment in the research may jeopardize his survival. Therefore, the utility of new scientific discoveries must be put in the perspective to the implementation of the already made ones, i.e. knowledge about how to navigate life. I do not suggest, however, that we should focus more on implementation rather than new scientific discoveries. The latter is an implementation within itself. The distinction that is crucial, though, is that overconfidence in science, in its narrow definition provided above, makes us blind to the immediate practicalities of life in which reciprocal intercourse is of immense importance for us as super social animals. And back to science. Here I've used science in its narrow definition. For those who think about science in broader terms and are open to the possibility of other explanatory ways of thinking and being, recognize that science is 100% compatible with these ways of thinking. Some would even argue that that too is science. Now, it's very important to draw a distinction between an open-minded attitude toward ways of exploring the world and inaccurate proclamations about new philosophical or sociological thinking. Going beyond our scientific hardcore reality is a fool's game if you end up being certain about your discoveries. History has given, and our contemporary society still gives, too much attention to many of these ideas. Certainly, it's the death of thoughtfulness in face of extremely difficult tasks. Humility is the key to betterment and deeper investigation. That is why I do not claim to have anything substantial to contribute as a replacement to science. I think science is among the most, if not the most important, discovery ever made. But the farmer above illustrates one of the most urgent tasks, both one, as it always been on the individual level, and two, as everyone in our society today have to deal with this issue collectively. The question is about life and how to manage it. Thus far, I've written about science in a way that I'm not comfortable with. The more skeptical science-minded reader will be pleased to hear that I do not question its relevance and method on any level. The only thing I claim is that the conventional view of science in practice and connection to the average person in their everyday life is severely limited and not fully developed. The application of scientific discoveries and the application of scientific ways of thinking in people's everyday life I see as a necessary step to illumination of our societal opportunities and challenges. The heart of the issue is we as organisms and our experience of living. How we approach our day-to-day life is not explained explicitly by science. Religion claims to have that insight. I'm not the one to judge be for or against it for now. Stoic philosophy is another often forgotten source that can give guidance in life. To what degree this philosophy can curb the indecisiveness of a liberal society with a plethora of choices I cannot tell, nor can I predict to what degree the challenge of choices is instructive for the individuals in the long-term development. But it's equally true that pain, obstacles, and suffering are not fruitful if they aren't taking you any closer to something beneficial. Are we talking about the damage on the muscles of their exercise that will come back stronger, or the damage on the tissue that will be forever deformed? Much wisdom can be found in the ability to accurately make that judgment of the events. But when it comes to human beings living in a society for which they are not evolutionarily designed for, it's obvious that many pitfalls of the latter sort exist. Excessive eating is one example. A more interesting and crucial issue for civilization long-term development is human beings' abilities and disabilities to cooperate and communicate in order to create and live. We are programmed to cooperate in small-scale communities or clans, not states and societies with millions of people. The insufficiency of today's society to offer firm and steady advice to its citizens is tightly interconnected with our liberty to do what we want with our lives. We will have to leave this crucial issue at this stage of the analysis and preserve the cohesion of the text and patience of the reader. But nevertheless, I think the cure is embedded in the conclusion up below. This whole text has been investigating one thing above all. Thought is a phenomenon forever present in our daily life and is the essence of historical development. It is the only medium through which we can approach life and its decisions. To get at the core what will be most beneficial for society and humans today, we need to appreciate the potential in contemplating these thoughts together. The right attitude in thinking, human discomfort in living, humans as extremely social animals, scientific discoveries and practice, vision and future. The last point is the only one not yet touched upon. In my limited understanding of reality, I find it to be the one missing piece of the puzzle that can catalyze human and civilization flourishing. A more thought-out explanation of these 5 phrases below, follows. If we are to accelerate our civilization development for the better of every human and living creature on Earth, we have to find the right, humble but sincere, accurate attitude of thinking about each other and reality. Keep in mind the undoubtable goal of reaching flourishing and happiness. Keep in mind the undoubtable goal of reaching flourishing and happiness for every individual. Discover the potential in connecting people in a much more efficient way for facilitating human development. Utilizing science as a means of understanding ourselves and the universe. And finally, use vision and belief in the future to connect people to each other around an ambitious and meaningful faith with these 4 principles above as fundamental guidelines. I want to practice what I preach. It would not be humble, sincere, accurate, nor socially intelligent to leave the reader with these proclamations without pointing out their fallibility. The incompetence of the writer made the last line sound like an establishment of a manifest. But what I do want to leave you with, the reader with, is a hope that these thoughts can have a profound impact in how the reader will approach the world in the long term. It's a foolish wish, but not impossible. A society in change has always events and processes that follow power laws, where some actions have enormous effect and some insignificant. By now you can hopefully get some leverage to the mental note you made in the beginning by taking time now to contemplate your answer. If, even on a very small scale, this would leave a person to connect to new people and start to build out a vision as a start or turning point for the cooperation that is necessary, even deeply craved by the human nature as a human social being, that would be a better impact than conceivably imaginable. I'll leave you with this. Our ability to imagine, whether it is for using insight from a text or plan a dinner party, or an ability praised by some of the most It is an ability praised by some of the most eminent humans ever lived, from well-known scientists and intellectuals such as Einstein and Adam Smith to other polymaths working at vital human issues in secret, such as Alfred North Whitehead. Imagination, use it or lose it. So that's the whole text, and I realized that I am still somewhat insecure on some claims there about science, because I read a lot. I led a course in philosophy of science after I wrote this, and now I'm still conflicted on the issue of science and so forth, but I still think the overall message in this is great. But I also think that the article is somewhat boring. I think at least it's investigating thought yeah, I just feel bored when I read it, to be honest, and I think that's maybe true for other people too. And it is somewhat, it is long sentences sometimes. And but anyway, I won't go further in reading here. I think I could, though, read another one. I think it's good practice. I'm just changed my mind. I think it's a good thing to do. I will write one that I actually not edited in 3 months, actually, quite a long time. But it's called The Current State of the World, so I've not really read it since 3 months ago, so this will be interesting. This is much shorter one, much shorter. And I also have another one after that, but that's also a very short one. Okay, let's do it like this. Okay, the current state of the world. Making sense of world today is a challenging exercise. Rapid changes with new inventions and the internet's capacity to expose people all over the world to new content and ideas, making it an exciting time to be alive. But this also causes an increased difficulty in navigating in the more diverse landscape of choices and life paths that are presented before us. This difficulty is explained by the fact that some stable patterns of interaction and career path, for example, was the case before the this is a funny sentence. Okay, this difficulty is explained by the fact that more stable patterns of interactions and career paths, for example, was the case before the internet explosion. Just think about what your life would have been like if you wouldn't have had access to the internet and social media the last 5 years, especially if you're younger. It's probably safe to say that you would have thought and made decisions drastically different to how you navigate today. Your social circle can be challenged by perspectives and choices much easier than before, despite claims of filter bubbles. Just contemplate what the internet enables you to have access to. For example, the utility of listening to a university professor at a university can be challenged by the one in the top of the field that people may have access to on YouTube or digital courses. My point is that a plethora of knowledge, perspectives, and ways of life are exposed to us in a way that has never been possible before. This changes everything. We struggle to make sense of this because our evolutionary origins. We're not adapted to have many cultural and diverse influences exposed to us simultaneously. The congruency in perspective necessary for human cooperation is essential, and the spread of information and diverse attitudes therefore troubles our longing for stability in outlook and sense-making. But that is not to say that diversity is bad. It is essential for human progress. It's just that we're not adapted to handle it well. Recognizing the fact that we as humans are deeply social illuminates our perspective on these changes. Our evolutionary origins as pack animals are one of two dominant factors that constituted the underlying foundation to the rise of civilizations, the other one being our ability to simulate the future and thus accumulate knowledge and expertise. This social constitution that is deeply embedded in our DNA as pack animals was necessary for the immense level of cooperation that the civilizational project implied. From an outside perspective, this still continuing project have always struggled to incorporate humans in a satisfying fashion. Clans, empires, religions, states, institutions, universities, and businesses were all examples of systems to organize human cooperation in a way that is satisfying enough to contribute to human functioning, both individually and collectively. Whatever objection one might have against any of these, they have all served to maintain or advance civilization structures in better or worse ways, and thus avoided the lack of social congruency and the cooperation with otherwise could have resulted in the ending of civilization. What conclusion can be drawn from this? The fact that we still need have these kind of systems make the current and future state of the world even more interesting. Add to that the increasing ability to connect over the boundaries of the current system with the internet. One could start by pondering the question of democracy, a rightfully praised way of governance in the West. To even hint at the notion of an alternative system today is very controversial, but in the perspective of humans as self-organizing organisms, it's not obvious that one manner of systemizing interaction will be the final absolute one. Historically, things have changed. Some things have been preserved and some have faded out. Maybe the most likely possibility is that democracy is continued in a revised form, while other more widespread principles and systems govern global security as a whole. World government is of course also an intensely debated topic, but what's of interest here is not, in my opinion, environmental challenges and ways of avoiding nuclear war as much as what these topics are a subset of. The larger question is how human cooperation in face of all its opportunities and challenges, individually and collectively, can and should look like in the future. It's a too common fallacy in giving macroeconomical or societal prediction to claim just unjustified degrees of certainty. To push things to the extreme, thinking one knows for certain how things relate in a complex world is an indication of immature comprehension of the scientific procedure and the insight derived from the Enlightenment. Therefore, I can't give a satisfactory level of certainty to the common exposure of the human cooperation is stated above. What I can do is lay out my thoughts and hope that it contributes to the larger puzzle that we're all trying to solve. In regard to this, I try to rely heavily on science, while also allowing for speculation as a means of connecting the dots as accurately as I can, and hope it contributes to further investigation and research. I've already stated my conviction of sociability and simulation as key components to civilizations. As a consequence, I think we need to have these two in mind when contemplating a desirable configuration of future world. So far, I've only scratched the surface when giving an explanation of this current state of the world. Nevertheless, these are the broad general movements that I think are happening, and I've given arguments based on scientific and general acceptable knowledge as far as I can tell. That does not make my outline infallible, but I hope it will be received as thorough and serious. As for the question of a future state of the world, as opposed to the text's main thread over the current state, there are some things to be said. I think I owe a short outline of where we might be heading and why, and maybe even more important than that, where do we want to go? And that's the end of the article, even though it's not finished. I just feel like I have to keep the intensity up. I don't like to be perceived as bored, and I don't like to feel like that I am bored. This is a somewhat even shorter one that I've actually been writing on just past weeks, at least the final two paragraphs, which is about 30% of the article. Okay. A civilizational update, a critique of contemporary public discussion. Throughout the ages, humankind has always carried with it convictions, often with the severe calamities of disruptions, tribal contempt, and even death as a consequence. It's a phenomenon caused by behaviors deeply rooted in our human brains, and therefore we should be very careful to discard it as easily solvable issues. Nevertheless, it's still a massive problem, and it's urgent that we address it forcefully. Much is at stake. Whether your concerns are circulating around political ideas, such as the environment, civil discourse, effective altruism, or free speech, other topics like religious philosophical discussions, health question, or education, I think it's important to realize that we're all under the influence of huge tribal forces working against us in our efforts to reach constructive, rational solutions to whatever issues we so dearly emphasize the importance of. In respect of your time and a concern of mine to not waste it, I have a responsibility to give you an assurance of the genuineness of my intention and to reassure you that I, with the respect of all the biases that we all have and are under the influence of, only have the intention to contribute for the well-being of everyone in writing this text and not to push a specific agenda. With that said, I hope you're willing to proceed. So what's happening in your life right now? It's a baffling question to ponder, and maybe somewhat rude of me push you to reflect on. But if we're being honest with ourselves, do we really know what's going on? Most of us who contemplate existential or societal issues have at one time thought about where we are in this day and age in our historical perspective, particularly being struck with a wonder concerning the rapid change in the recent past and present. Your role in this is obviously of importance, both for you and for everyone else in this ecosystem of civilization. I bring this up not to criticize your conduct, but to eliminate the profound part you and I and everyone else plays in this. This is a lack of appreciation in respect to what we decide to do with our lives and how we talk about it with others. I would argue that it's a lack of agency in addressing our own lives, the lives of our immediate surroundings and the world at large. If we postpone critical decision, we neglect a constructive betterment, and in the long run, make sure that our lives, after all, doesn't really matter that much. To clarify my argument, there's a link between our public discussion, our problems and opportunities as a society, and our own life and conduct. With the internet, this connection is even more apparent. But my problem is focused on the obvious, yet evasive, immediate relation between 1. How we think and following and act in our daily lives, and 2. How that manifests itself as an impact on our world and civilization. For your knowledge, this is not an attempt to push an environmentalist argument, if that worries you, even though that could possibly be an application. My point is merely that we are so caught up in the flourish of activities in our daily life that we lose our ability to forcefully establish a constructive agency to make our lives meaningful in the pursuit of whatever we judge to be at the essence of our flourishing. This search for meaning is for many people a quite trite subject, possibly due to our incapability to address it in a satisfying manner. For convenience, I will evade the philosophical discussion, because the purpose is rather to dial in on how you and I can address our lives in conjunction with others. The purposeful life may differ between individuals, but the means for how we get there are universal. Hypersocial learning organisms as we are, it has to start with collaborative sense-making. What is lacking in our public discussion is that space for exploring new ideas with a critical component of having a relation to our immediate and near future existence. To clarify, it is my belief that for one's ability to make significant positive change in life, there has to be a sincere connection between the individual and other people. The reason I use the word sincere is because it is probably more important that the connection is grounded in genuine investigation than it is that the connection is intense in other respects. It is not enough with frequent meetings, not even common strives or relatively deep appreciation between people. And that's how far I got. I think I managed to making this more interesting. I had a different tone and some struggles, but I think it was great. Only 38 minutes has passed, and I feel, it feels great. Now, thinking back and forth here, and this is, it is interesting to think about one thing here, because I tend to be very thoughtful in how I express myself, not because I think it's very important to be that. It's just, it's not the expressions themselves, it's more like how I communicate, because I think when I speak. I do not just speak, and it can be interpreted as boring or that I don't really know what I'm saying. And I think it's a crucial issue for me to tackle, because I tend to be very think and say something, think and say, exactly as I said in the beginning. And it is an issue that I have to tackle, and I don't know exactly how I should tackle it, because for me it's just who I am to speak and think at the same time, or at least that's one way I could argue for it. But at the same time, when people are thinking, when people really are when I am thinking, I'm quite sure that thought processes are going much faster than our ability to speak. And that's probably why I don't am as good at speaking as I want to, because when second guessing your own thoughts and you're so this is how I would put it. When I think something, my connection to speech is not as good as I want it to be, and it's not as good as it can be. So when I am speaking, it's not necessarily that I think so thoroughly, or that's a part of it, but in connecting it with speech, it's actually an interesting question, because if you're speaking, because if you are speaking or the question I'm raising is, could I think the way I think and communicate much more clear? And I think one issue is I've not practiced it so that speaking is so fluent that there is an intense connection between thinking and speaking, or at least that would be the argument for saying that it's actually more about practice than it is about because the counter argument would be quite depressing, is that it's impossible for someone who is thinking thoughtfully and slow or carefully to speak in a manner that is intriguing. And I actually don't think that's necessarily the case. I do think, on the other hand, that there is a trade-off. The more you practice speaking, the less you're thinking. At least, no, that's not. Well, communication with other people are oftentimes at risk at being less. It's essential for humans to acquire knowledge, but it also enormously, like Einstein, for example, and really these people that have immense contributing things to, like Newton and so forth, they are not really that social people, and some highly introverted people are focusing down on issues and really making a huge. That's not to say, I heard that most people that are billionaires are introverted. No, are extroverted, but in the top, the most really successful are introverts. So it's kind of I guess it's more probable to be a billionaire or really successful if you're extroverted, but to be really, really extraordinarily successful, there's a more probability that introversion is getting you there. But as long as you're doing both, I mean, thinking for yourself and being extremely dedicated to investigate ideas for yourself and not only communicating, because if you're a very social person, you're at the risk at socializing with people that are not immensely impactful in a good manner, because most of these people are maybe dead even. The really impactful people are dead and have written books, and if you read a book, you're not communicating, you're passively taking something in and you're thinking in part. So what I would argue is that introversion is at odds somewhat, or critical thinking is to some level at odds with being very good at communicating, but I also think that communicating is an extraordinary way to develop thought as well. But anyway, just got a message from someone who organizes philosophy meetings that I've not gone to for, I think, maybe 1.5 years. No. Is it that long ago? Anyway, that's not interesting for you to hear. I'm just confused that he. Anyway, so yeah, that's one thing. That's one thing. Yeah, I'll just summarize that and then we'll end. So I think there is a critical trade-off between contemplating things and communicating them in a friendly, socially accessible way that which definitely is a problem that I have. But I also think it's some people might think it's really interesting to listen to people who are calm and just thinking as well as at the same time as they are expressing their thoughts. But I think it's also good to try to be more energy and to really push a little more, put more energy into the way of you express thoughts. And so yeah, but I evading the original question here, and is an example of me actually being somewhat confused in the way I think and not being like an authority in how I speak about things, because that's also an issue, because I tend to think that if you're insecure about things, not insecurity like yourself, but it could be related, but if you're insecure on your convictions, if you're really questioning your convictions, that's actually a good thing, and that's hard to disentangle from rational thinking, really. So how do you be rational but at the same time express some level of authority or assertion in what you're saying, and not only how your opinions are. If you say that, okay, I have some level of uncertainty about this, but I mean in the practice of speaking, that contemplating and thinking, like I'm doing right now when I try to figure out what I'm going to say. What is that an indication of? Is it an indication of lack of knowledge, or is it an indication of what I call sincere investigation of questioning your own beliefs and your thought patterns? Or is it just simply a defect in speaking, or a defect in, or something that you can improve upon, connecting your thoughts with your speech? Because, well, I can't go deep into this, but I, for example, like to listen to Peter Thiel when he's thinking about stuff, and he's not as I would say, careful in speech as I am. But Ryan Holiday, when he writes about him, says that he's very careful in speech, and he often says, I think, and I think the reason he's doing that is because he wants to manage and to have a certain level of authority. When he says, I think, I mean, not only think it's a tick he has, I actually think he's really want to maintain control over the conversation and not being one who put to the sideline just because they're very critical in their thinking, because that's a danger, I think, in their critical thinking. So there is probably a room for someone like for example Peter Thiel, who has good thoughts, some of them really good thoughts. I can't say for every one of them, but yeah, I think that's roughly accurate. And I also think this is interesting, because I tend to, okay, being totally honest, I'm not exactly sure what I'm thinking right now. But what I want to do, because I was about to cancel this one, but I feel like it's really, really, I just feel good about speaking now. It feels great to do it, and but I also sense that some energy of me, I always have to manage to keep my energy up, because I tend to, because I've thought about this, how I speak about them, making these videos, I tend to be quite disappointed with me not speaking enough with enthusiasm and energy and so forth. But at the same time, I feel like I want to really go back and contemplate sometimes when I'm doing this. That's the issue I have now. I'm trying to figure out, is it best for me to not push on and just thinking, or should I push on? And yeah. But I also think that thought in itself could be non-instructive and forcing me from something that really would benefit me. I'm really, really, really hesitant about some things. And okay, I just feel there are so many thoughts in my head right now that I want to think through, that I just can't continue this video right now, because it's really at the core of how I organize my day and so forth. So I just have to write and think for myself. But this was a somewhat different video, and I hope it was fun to listen to. Bye bye.